In the quiet embrace of a suburban neighborhood, a place where the hum of daily life usually provided the only soundtrack, an unsettling silence fell. The kind of silence that precedes a storm, or perhaps marks its immediate aftermath. This was a community accustomed to the ordinary rhythms of suburban existence. The distant laughter of children from manicured yards, the gentle rumble of cars passing by on their way to school or work, the amiable greetings exchanged between neighbors tending to their gardens. It was a picture of tranquility, seemingly untouched by the harsh realities that often dominate headlines. But all that changed on a crisp autumn morning when the ordinary gave way to the unimaginable. The discovery was made by a concerned friend who, after repeated unanswered calls, decided to check on Emily. Her unease grew with every unanswered knock on the apartment door, culminating in the decision to use a spare key. What she found inside shattered the peaceful facade of the neighborhood forever. The apartment, usually so meticulously kept, was in disarray. Furniture was overturned, lamps lay broken on the floor, and a chilling sense of violence permeated the air. And then, amidst the chaos, the friend made the horrifying discovery: Emily's lifeless body. The arrival of emergency services was swift, their flashing lights an unwelcome beacon against the morning sky, drawing curious, then horrified, glances from the few neighbors already stirring. Uniformed officers quickly secured the scene, their trained eyes assessing the grim tableau. The forensic team followed, moving with a practiced efficiency that belied the gravity of the situation, beginning the painstaking process of documenting every detail. Each piece of overturned furniture, every scattered item, every subtle mark on the walls held a potential clue. The apartment transformed from a personal sanctuary into a meticulously observed crime scene, a canvas for the unseen events of the night before. Emily was a young woman in the prime of her life, known for her vibrant spirit and infectious optimism. She had built a comfortable life for herself in this seemingly idyllic community, pursuing a career she was passionate about and cultivating a wide circle of friends and acquaintances. Her absence, sudden and violent, left a gaping void, not just in the lives of those closest to her, but also in the collective consciousness of a neighborhood grappling with the abrupt intrusion of tragedy. The question that immediately loomed large was not just who, but why. As detectives began their initial assessment, a crucial detail emerged from the preliminary examination of the apartment. There were no signs of forced entry. The locks on the doors were intact, the windows showed no signs of tampering, and there was no evidence of a struggle from the outside in. This singular fact immediately narrowed the scope of the investigation. In the chilling lexicon of law enforcement, it spoke volumes. It suggested, with unsettling clarity, that Emily had not been the victim of a random break-in or an opportunistic stranger. Instead, the lack of forced entry led investigators to a far more disturbing conclusion. The victim likely knew her attacker. This was not a random act of violence. It was personal. The implications of this finding sent a ripple of unease through the investigating team. It meant the danger had come from within Emily's trusted circle, from someone she had allowed into her private space. The case was no longer just about finding a killer. It was about uncovering a betrayal. This initial assessment immediately shifted the focus from the general public to Emily's known contacts, her relationships, and the intricate web of her personal life. The quiet suburban neighborhood, once a symbol of safety and normalcy, now held the dark secret of a betrayal, leaving everyone to wonder who among them could be capable of such an act. The search for answers had begun. It was clear it would lead down a path far more complex than a simple home invasion. The tranquility had been shattered, replaced by an unsettling sense of vulnerability and a pervasive question: who knew Emily, and who among them had brought this terror to her door? With the initial shock giving way to a focused determination, the investigative team began the arduous task of piecing together Emily's final hours and the circumstances surrounding her death. The apartment, now thoroughly processed for every possible fragment of evidence, began to yield its secrets. Forensics technicians worked tirelessly, collecting fibers, fingerprints, and anything that might connect a perpetrator to the scene. Meanwhile, detectives established a command center, a hub where every piece of information, no matter how small, was documented and analyzed. Their immediate priority was to construct a detailed timeline of Emily's last movements, a chronological map that could highlight deviations from her routine or point to a specific window of opportunity for an attacker. Emily had been a vibrant individual, her life rich with connections and aspirations. She worked as a graphic designer for a local marketing firm, a job she excelled at, fueled by her creativity and sharp eye for detail. Her colleagues remembered her as dedicated and collaborative, always ready to lend a hand or offer an insightful perspective. Outside of work, Emily was a keen runner, often seen jogging along the tree-lined streets of her neighborhood in the early mornings. She was also an avid reader, her apartment filled with books on various subjects, reflecting a curious and engaged mind. Her social circle was diverse, encompassing friends from different stages of her life. College acquaintances, former coworkers, and a close-knit group of neighbors she often met for coffee or evening walks. The sheer normalcy of her life made the violence that ended it all the more jarring. The initial round of interviews began with those closest to Emily, her parents, who live in a neighboring state and were devastated by the news, her closest friends, still reeling from the shock, and her coworkers, struggling to comprehend the sudden absence of their cheerful colleague. Each conversation provided fragments of Emily's life, painting a picture of a young woman with a bright future suddenly extinguished. The detectives listened intently, sifting through anecdotes and memories for any hint of trouble, any recent conflicts, or any individuals who might have harbored ill will towards Emily. The focus was on identifying potential motives and establishing a preliminary list of individuals who had been in contact with her recently. Amidst these early interviews, one name consistently surfaced: Jake, Emily's recent ex-boyfriend. Their relationship, which had spanned nearly 2 years, was often described as tumultuous, marked by periods of intense affection followed by heated arguments and dramatic reconciliations. Friends recalled numerous instances where Emily had expressed frustration with Jake's possessiveness and controlling behavior. They spoke of emotional strain, of Emily often feeling drained after their disputes, and of her eventual decision to end the relationship, a choice she had conveyed to friends as difficult but necessary for her peace of mind. The breakup had occurred only a few weeks prior to her death, and while Emily had expressed a sense of relief, some friends also noted a lingering concern about Jake's reaction. He had, they recounted, struggled to accept the breakup, repeatedly attempting to contact her and persuade her to reconsider. This history, the recent separation, and the reports of Jake's controlling nature immediately made him a person of significant interest. When detectives approached Jake, he was outwardly cooperative, though his demeanor was one of somber resignation. He expressed profound sadness over Emily's death and insisted he was just as shocked and heartbroken as everyone else. When asked about his whereabouts during the time of the murder, he provided a detailed alibi. He claimed he had been out of town, visiting his parents who lived several hours away in a different state. He recounted specifics: the exact time he left, the route he took, the activities he engaged in with his family, and the precise moment he returned home. He even offered to provide receipts from gas stations and a convenience store along his route as proof. His story was coherent, and on the surface, it seemed to place him far from the crime scene. Detectives, however, are trained to look beyond the surface. While Jake's alibi seemed solid, the very smoothness of his recollection, combined with the nature of his past relationship with Emily and the unsettling lack of forced entry at the crime scene, prompted a deeper level of scrutiny. They noted his seemingly composed demeanor, a stark contrast to the profound grief typically exhibited by someone losing a recent partner under such horrific circumstances. Every detail he provided, from the specific exit he took off the highway to the brand of coffee he bought at a rest stop, was logged for verification. The investigation was still in its early stages, but the threads of Emily's life, intertwined with the complexities of her past relationship, were beginning to unravel, pointing the detectives in a very specific direction: even as they continued to pursue all other leads. The journey into the truth of Emily's final moments had just begun. The investigation was now in full swing, operating on multiple fronts. While the forensic team continued their meticulous work in the lab, processing the collected evidence from Emily's apartment, the detectives on the ground shifted their focus to a more technologically oriented aspect of modern crime solving: surveillance footage. In an increasingly interconnected world, cameras were everywhere, on street corners, outside businesses, on residential properties, and even in the dashboards of parked vehicles. Each lens, however small or innocuous it seemed, represented a potential silent witness, a digital record that could corroborate or contradict alibis, establish timelines, or even identify individuals. The process of canvassing for surveillance footage is often a painstaking one, requiring patience and a methodical approach. Detectives systematically began mapping out the area surrounding Emily's apartment complex, extending their search outward in concentric circles. They knocked on the doors of every business within a several-block radius, inquiring about their security camera systems. Convenience stores, gas stations, dry cleaners, restaurants, and even small independent shops were all approached. Each request involved explaining the purpose of the inquiry, securing permission to review footage, and then the laborious process of either physically collecting hard drives or waiting for store owners to download relevant segments. Many systems were old, grainy, or poorly positioned, offering little help. Some owners were hesitant, concerned about privacy or the disruption to their business. Yet, the detectives persevered, understanding that even a fleeting glimpse of a vehicle or an individual could be the critical link they needed. Beyond businesses, they also reached out to homeowners associations and individual residents. Many suburban homes now boast doorbell cameras or external security systems, often covering driveways, sidewalks, and even parts of the street. Flyers were distributed, urging anyone with external cameras covering the night of the murder to contact the police. It was a digital dragnet, cast wide to capture any possible image that could shed light on Emily's last moments. The sheer volume of data collected was immense, requiring dedicated personnel to review hours upon hours of seemingly mundane footage. It was a tedious, eye-straining task, often yielding nothing of value, a test of endurance and focus. However, amidst this vast ocean of data, one particular location held significant promise: a small, independently owned convenience store located just 2 blocks from Emily's apartment complex. Unlike many older establishments, this store had recently upgraded its security system, installing high-definition CCTV cameras that provided remarkably clear images of the street, the sidewalk, and the parking lot. These cameras were positioned strategically, covering the main entrance to the store, the public sidewalk directly in front of it, and a portion of the alleyway that ran adjacent to Emily's complex. The manager, a cooperative individual, readily granted access to the recordings from the night of the murder. The discovery was not immediate. The designated detective meticulously reviewed the footage, fast-forwarding through hours of ordinary nighttime activity: late-night shoppers, delivery trucks, the occasional passing vehicle. His eyes scanned for anything out of place, any figure moving with purpose in the vicinity of the apartment complex. And then there was, at precisely 11:37 p.m., a figure emerged from the shadows of the alleyway that bordered Emily's complex. The quality of the camera was such that the individual's build, gait, and even the distinguishing features of his clothing were remarkably clear. The man paused, looked around, and then, with a seemingly casual but purposeful stride, entered the main pedestrian entrance to Emily's apartment building. The detective immediately froze the frame. The man's appearance matched the general description of Jake: his height, his lean build, even the distinctive baseball cap he often wore. The specific timestamp on the video, meticulously recorded by the surveillance system, was the crucial piece of the puzzle: 11:37 p.m. This exact time directly contradicted Jake's alibi, which placed him several hours away at his parents' home at that very moment. The footage unequivocally placed him at Emily's apartment complex on the very night of the murder, a place he adamantly claimed he had not been. The significance of this single piece of digital evidence could not be overstated. It transformed Jake from a person of interest, whose alibi seemed plausible, into the primary suspect, directly connected to the crime scene through an unassailable visual record. The silent witness of the CCTV camera had spoken, dismantling Jake's carefully constructed narrative piece by piece. This was the breakthrough the investigation had been searching for. It provided a concrete starting point for the next phase of the inquiry, shifting the focus from broad canvassing to a direct, targeted approach. The digital footprint had led them to a clear path forward, confirming their initial suspicions and providing the leverage needed for the next, critical step, a direct confrontation with a man who had claimed to be miles away. The hunt for the truth had taken a decisive turn. With the damning surveillance footage secured, the investigative team meticulously prepared for their next critical step, a direct confrontation with Jake. This was no longer a routine interview. It was a focused interrogation designed to dismantle his alibi and elicit the truth. Every detail of the footage was analyzed, every frame scrutinized, to ensure maximum impact when presented. The detectives aimed to create a situation where Jake would be unable to maintain his fabricated story, forcing him to account for his undeniable presence at Emily's apartment building. Jake was brought in for a second round of questioning, ostensibly for a follow-up to his previous statements. The atmosphere in the interrogation room was markedly different from their initial, more casual encounter. The lights were bright, the table stark, and the air was thick with unspoken tension. The detectives began by revisiting his earlier alibi, allowing him to reiterate his narrative about being out of town, giving him enough rope to entangle himself further in his own fabrication. Jake, still outwardly composed, repeated his story with the same measured tone and detailed recollections as before, seemingly confident in his ability to deflect suspicion. Then, the moment arrived. Without warning, the detective slid a tablet across the table, displaying a still frame from the CCTV footage. It was a clear image of Jake, distinct in his recognizable baseball cap, entering Emily's apartment complex at precisely 11:37 p.m. on the night of the murder. The timestamp was prominently displayed. The casual demeanor Jake had maintained throughout the conversation evaporated instantly. His eyes, which had previously held a look of calm resignation, now darted between the image on the screen and the impassive faces of the detectives. A flicker of panic, quickly masked, crossed his features. For a long moment, silence hung in the room, broken only by the hum of the ventilation system. Jake stared at the image, his composure visibly cracking. He opened his mouth to speak, then closed it, searching for words. His previous confident assertion of being out of town seemed to mock him from the screen. He initially attempted to deny it, his voice a strained whisper. "That's not me. I wasn't there. I was out of town, just like I told you." But the image was irrefutable. The angle, the clarity, the specific details of his clothing, and even his particular stride made denial impossible. As the detectives pressed him, calmly but firmly, Jake's story began to shift. The firm declarations of his alibi crumbled. He stammered, contradicted himself, and eventually, with a sigh of defeat, admitted to being in town. "Okay, fine," he conceded, his voice low. "I was in town. I didn't want to get involved." He then began to construct a new narrative, one designed to explain his presence without admitting guilt. He claimed he had driven back into town late that night on an impulse, a sudden decision to talk things out with Emily. He described a desperate attempt to reconcile, driven by his lingering feelings for her. He insisted that he had simply gone to her apartment, hoping to persuade her to reconsider their breakup. He recounted their interaction as an argument, a heated exchange of words typical of their past disputes. He maintained that after a tense conversation, he had left Emily unharmed, simply walking out of the apartment and returning to his own home. He reiterated that he was upset, yes, but he had not harmed her. His story was now that he had been there, but only for a volatile conversation, and that he had departed before any violence occurred. However, as Jake narrated his revised version of events, inconsistencies began to pile up, raising immediate red flags for the seasoned detectives. If he had only gone there to talk, why had he so vehemently denied being in town? Why the elaborate alibi, complete with fabricated details about visiting his parents and specific gas station receipts? His explanation for suddenly changing his mind and driving back into town felt contrived, lacking the genuine spontaneity one might expect. Furthermore, his description of the argument itself felt hollow, devoid of the emotional impact one would expect from a final, heated confrontation. His movements after leaving Emily's apartment were also vague. He claimed to have gone straight home and fallen asleep, but he couldn't provide any corroborating details or explain why he hadn't come forward when Emily's body was discovered, especially if he was innocent and genuinely concerned. His account of their conversation lacked the depth and detail that would typically accompany a significant argument, particularly one that occurred hours before a brutal murder. The timing of his arrival and departure, as he described it, also didn't quite align with the initial estimations of the crime's timeline. Every question designed to clarify his new story only seemed to expose more holes in it. The detectives observed his body language, the constant shifting in his seat, the avoidance of direct eye contact, the nervous fidgeting of his hands. These nonverbal cues reinforced their growing conviction that Jake was still withholding crucial information, and that his revised narrative was merely a desperate attempt to distance himself from the actual crime. His admission to being at the scene was a significant step, but his continued insistence on his innocence, juxtaposed with the mounting evidence of his deception, only deepened their suspicion. They knew they were close, but they needed more concrete proof, something beyond his changing story, to link him unequivocally to Emily's death. The battle of wills in the interrogation room was far from over. The stage was set for the next crucial phase. The forensic investigation that would either prove or disprove Jake's evolving account. The results provided another devastating link. The blood on the knife belonged to Emily. This established not only that Jake's fingerprints were on the murder weapon, but also that the weapon itself had been used against Emily. The next crucial piece of evidence came from Jake's own clothing, which had been seized under warrant. He had been wearing a dark jacket and jeans when he was taken in for questioning, and these items were now under the microscope. Forensic technicians employed specialized techniques to detect even the smallest, invisible traces. Using advanced luminol tests, which react to the presence of blood, they discovered minute, almost imperceptible spatters of blood on Jake's jacket and the cuff of his jeans. These spatters were not immediately visible to the naked eye, suggesting an attempt to clean or conceal them. Once the blood was detected, a painstaking process of collection and analysis began. Tiny samples were taken, and DNA extraction was performed. The subsequent DNA profiling yielded the same irrefutable conclusion as with the knife. The blood on Jake's clothing belonged to Emily. This discovery was profoundly significant. It unequivocally placed Jake in direct physical contact with Emily during the commission of a violent act. It dismantled his narrative of a simple verbal argument followed by his departure. The presence of Emily's blood on his clothes indicated a struggle, a close-range encounter where blood was shed, a scenario entirely consistent with the violent scene discovered in Emily's apartment. Further analysis of the crime scene yielded additional supporting evidence. Hair and fiber samples were meticulously collected from Emily's apartment, particularly from around her body and from areas indicating struggle. Under microscopic examination, some fibers found on Emily's clothing and beneath her fingernails matched those from the fabric of Jake's jacket. The results provided another devastating link. The blood on the knife belonged to Emily. This established not only that Jake's fingerprints were on the murder weapon, but also that the weapon itself had been used against Emily. The next crucial piece of evidence came from Jake's own clothing, which had been seized under warrant. He had been wearing a dark jacket and jeans when he was taken in for questioning, and these items were now under the microscope. Forensic technicians employed specialized techniques to detect even the smallest, invisible traces. Using advanced luminol tests, which react to the presence of blood, they discovered minute, almost imperceptible spatters of blood on Jake's jacket and the cuff of his jeans. These spatters were not immediately visible to the naked eye, suggesting an attempt to clean or conceal them. Once the blood was detected, a painstaking process of collection and analysis began. Tiny samples were taken, and DNA extraction was performed. The subsequent DNA profiling yielded the same irrefutable conclusion as with the knife. The blood on Jake's clothing belonged to Emily. This discovery was profoundly significant. It unequivocally placed Jake in direct physical contact with Emily during the commission of a violent act. It dismantled his narrative of a simple verbal argument followed by his departure. The presence of Emily's blood on his clothes indicated a struggle, a close-range encounter where blood was shed, a scenario entirely consistent with the violent scene discovered in Emily's apartment. Further analysis of the crime scene yielded additional supporting evidence. Hair and fiber samples were meticulously collected from Emily's apartment, particularly from around her body and from areas indicating struggle. Under microscopic examination, some fibers found on Emily's clothing and beneath her fingernails matched those from the fabric of Jake's jacket. This cross-transfer of fibers, though sometimes subtle, provides compelling circumstantial evidence of physical contact between two individuals, especially during a violent struggle. It further reinforced the direct link between Jake and the crime scene. Even the pattern of the blood spatters in the apartment was analyzed. Bloodstain pattern analysis is a specialized forensic discipline that can reconstruct the events of a violent crime. The size, shape, and distribution of bloodstains can indicate the type of weapon used, the force applied, the number of blows, and the relative positions of the victim and assailant. The patterns found in Emily's apartment were consistent with a close-range attack involving a sharp object, and they aligned with a scenario where the assailant would have been in close proximity to the victim as the injuries were inflicted, thus explaining the presence of blood on Jake's clothing. Each piece of forensic evidence, from the fingerprints on the knife to the DNA-matched blood on his clothes and the transferred fibers, built an unassailable case. Individually, each might be a strong indicator, but together they formed a powerful, undeniable narrative. They systematically contradicted every aspect of Jake's evolving story, from his initial fabricated alibi to his revised claim of an innocent verbal argument. The scientific findings painted a picture of a violent encounter, placing Jake at the very heart of the crime, not just present, but actively involved. The meticulous work of the forensic team had provided the tangible, objective proof necessary to move beyond suspicion and toward formal charges. With this overwhelming body of scientific evidence, the prosecution was now equipped with a powerful arsenal for the upcoming legal battle. Testimonies from Emily's friends and family. These witnesses, fighting back tears, spoke of Emily's vibrant life, her dreams, and, crucially, the tumultuous and often abusive nature of her relationship with Jake. They detailed his possessiveness, his controlling behavior, and the emotional toll their breakup had taken on Emily, establishing a clear motive rooted in anger and a refusal to accept the end of their relationship. Then came the technological evidence, presented with precision and clarity. The surveillance footage from the convenience store was played for the jury, a stark, silent film showing Jake's unmistakable figure entering Emily's apartment complex at the precise moment he claimed to be hundreds of miles away. The timestamp, bold and undeniable, flashed on the screen, systematically demolishing his fabricated alibi. Expert witnesses from the police force meticulously explained the process of obtaining and verifying the footage, ensuring the jury understood its authenticity and significance. Following this, the forensic evidence took center stage, presented by a series of highly qualified scientific experts. The fingerprint analyst demonstrated how Jake's unique patterns were found on the murder weapon, a kitchen knife. The DNA expert then took the stand, explaining the complex science of DNA profiling in clear, accessible terms, and then presenting the irrefutable matches, Emily's blood found on the knife, and more damningly, on Jake's clothing. Diagrams and magnified images illustrated the fiber transfer evidence, showing how microscopic threads from Jake's jacket were found on Emily's body, indicating a close physical struggle. The bloodstain pattern analyst provided a chilling reconstruction of the attack, explaining how the patterns of blood in the apartment were consistent with a violent, close-range assault, and how Jake's presence during such an event would inevitably lead to the spatter found on his clothes. Each piece of scientific evidence built upon the last, forming an impenetrable wall of proof. The defense, despite their best efforts, struggled to counter this overwhelming barrage of evidence. Their strategy primarily revolved around attempting to cast doubt on the timeline, suggesting that the footage could be misinterpreted or that the forensic evidence was somehow contaminated or circumstantial. They cross-examined witnesses aggressively, questioning the memory of Emily's friends and attempting to find flaws in the collection or analysis of the forensic data. They suggested alternate theories, implying Emily might have had other unknown enemies or that someone else could have entered the apartment after Jake left. However, each attempt to sow doubt was systematically dismantled by the prosecution's experts and the sheer consistency of the evidence. Jake himself did not testify, a choice that, while his right, left his new, inconsistent narrative largely unchallenged by his own voice. After weeks of testimony, closing arguments were delivered, summarizing the respective cases. The prosecution's final address powerfully connected every piece of evidence, painting a grim but clear picture of Jake's guilt. The jury then retired to deliberate. The tension in the courtroom was palpable, a mix of exhaustion and anticipation. Days passed, filled with anxious waiting. Finally, after a period of intense deliberation, the jury returned with their verdict. The foreman stood, and in a voice that carried through the hushed courtroom, pronounced Jake guilty of first-degree murder. The verdict was met with a quiet but profound wave of relief from Emily's family. The judge, after hearing victim impact statements from Emily's grieving parents, proceeded with the sentencing. Jake was condemned to life in prison without the possibility of parole. The severity of the sentence reflected the heinousness of the crime and the overwhelming evidence of his culpability. The case of Emily's murder and Jake's subsequent conviction served as a stark reminder of the evolving landscape of crime and justice. It underscored the critical role that surveillance technology now plays in modern investigations, transforming mundane street cameras into powerful tools for truth. It also highlighted the indispensable contributions of forensic science, demonstrating how painstaking laboratory work, far removed from the dramatic confrontations of the courtroom, can unravel complex mysteries and secure convictions based on objective, irrefutable data. In an age where criminals may believe they have left no trace, the microscopic world and the ubiquitous eye of digital cameras often reveal the hidden truth. The video concludes by emphasizing not only the tragic loss of Emily's life, but also the profound importance of vigilance within communities. It reminded viewers of the insidious nature of domestic violence, often hidden behind closed doors, and the imperative need for society to recognize its warning signs and provide unwavering support for victims of abuse. While justice for Emily had been served, her story became a powerful testament to the devastating consequences of unchecked anger and control, and a call to action for communities to foster environments where such violence cannot thrive. Emily's family found a degree of peace in the conviction, a sense that their daughter's voice, though silenced by violence, had finally been heard, and that the person responsible had been held accountable. The memory of Emily, and the lessons learned from her tragic end, continued to resonate, ensuring that her story would serve as a poignant reminder of the enduring fight for safety and justice. Thank you for watching. Like, share, and subscribe for more.